There you go.
Let's pray together. Father, thank you for this group of friends that gathers here tonight to hear your word. As we do, we're mindful of the fact that Jesus, toward the end of his time on earth, looked at his disciples and said, "No longer do I call you disciples, for the disciple doesn't know what the master is doing, but I've called you friends." And Lord, we thank you that we know what you were doing in these days as you set your face to go to Jerusalem and to be the Lamb of God for us, who sacrificed his life that we might live. And so we pray that we would live tonight, and that your Spirit would guide us as we study and show us things out of your word that we have not known before. For we pray and ask it, Jesus, in your name. Amen.
Amen.
So let's see. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. But I'm going to throw up a PowerPoint first because I just can't do something without you guys seeing my guy here.
There he is.
Yeah.
I love that.
I want to talk with you tonight about Moses, and we're going to call it Moses, the Early Years. And we're going to get through chapter 1, I think, and maybe a little bit into chapter 2, but I'm going to try and, over the next 2 weeks, look at the early years of Moses, leading up to the time when he entered Egypt, responding to God's call to set Israel free from Egyptian bondage and slavery. So I want to look at the beginning part of the book of Exodus with you over this week and next week. And then on the 29th of March, Joe Bettridge is going to come and he's going to talk about a different part of the book of Exodus. And I'll let him talk about that at the end of the time tonight. But I want to talk with you about Moses, the early years. Here's Moses, Michelangelo's Moses. And I don't know how many of you have seen this, but I had the great blessing of being able to spend a part of my sophomore year abroad, and I was studying at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. But in the break, the spring break, which is 4 weeks long, at least when I was studying here, I went to Europe and was a vagabond. I had a backpack, and sometimes I slept out in the open. Sometimes I found a place to stay in a hostel. But I remember being in Rome. I remember seeing this statue. And this picture really doesn't do it justice because the statue is 8 feet tall. And there are not many things in this world that I have to look up to. But it's on a bit of a pedestal, and then it's 8 feet tall. And it kind of reminded me of being in the Lincoln Memorial and looking up at the gigantic figure of Lincoln in the memorial, standing there looking at this figure of Moses, which is in a church in Rome. And thinking, you know, gosh, if he stood up, he'd be about 16 feet tall. But there it is. This is Michelangelo's Moses. And, you know, you look at it and you can see that he's got the tablets in his right arm. And then you look up and you see that serious Moses look. And then you look at him and you go, wait a minute, he's got 2 horns. What are the horns all about? Well, the horns actually come from a mistranslation in the Latin Vulgate of the Hebrew word that is usually translated shines. And it turns out that they're related, but Jerome took the left turn when he should have taken the right turn and talked about, told Michelangelo to make Moses' face shine brighter than the rest of the statue. Anyway, it's a very commonly known thing, but when people look at it, they go, why does he have horns? So now you know. Now I'm going to save that one for later. I want to get out of this thing. There we go. And I want to go into something else. Now, can all of you see that on your screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. That's what I was shooting for. I'm just going to hide this for a minute. There we go. That's what I want to do. All right, so I want to talk with you about the book of Exodus. I've said I want to talk about the early chapters and the early years of Moses. But as I do that, I want to just put in your mind a very simple threefold outline for the whole book of Exodus. The book of Exodus really divides into 2 large halves with a very important story in the middle. And so in Exodus chapters 1 through 18, you have the first part of the book. In the first part of the book, you know what's happening. God is redeeming his people. He's delivering them from bondage and slavery in Egypt. He's doing it through a member of the tribe of Levi. You remember at the end of the book of Genesis, we read about all of the folks who came down to Egypt to survive the famine. And all of the sons of Jacob, one of the sons of Jacob was Levi. From him was descended a whole bunch of folks. They became known as the tribe of Levi. And Moses was a member of the tribe of Levi. And God uses Moses, as you know, as his agent to redeem his people, to deliver them from slavery. So that's chapters 1 through 18. And we're going to talk about the early part of those chapters tonight. And then the last half of the book is really chapters 20 through 40. And in those chapters, God is really revealing his grace and his glory. God is going to graciously allow his presence to go with his people as they journey from Egypt back, God hopes, to the promised land. And that's the land that was promised to Abraham and back in Genesis chapter 12. And as they go, they are to bring along a tent where God will meet with his people, and the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, all of the instructions for how it's supposed to be built, and what's supposed to go on there, and the sacrifices that are supposed to be made. Those are all in Genesis chapter 20 through 40. So in 1 through 18, God is setting his people free. In 20 through 40, he's really showing them how to worship as they walk, how to walk through life worshiping. And that leaves out one chapter. And if you're sharp, you know that it's chapter 19. And chapter 19 is really the pivot point in the book of Exodus. Chapter 19 is where God reveals his grace and glory. He graciously covenants with his people anew on top of Mount Sinai and reveals to them his commandments by which they can enjoy close relationship with him. It is a gracious covenant, just like the covenant that God made with Abram. It's a gracious covenant. It's made with the whole nation of Israel through the agency of Moses. And that's in chapter 19. So that's really a simple outline of the book of Exodus. And you need to complexify it, but it's nice to have a simple outline and know that there's a beginning half and an ending half and something in the middle. And the middle is the pivot point. So now with that in mind, I want to read to you the beginning verses of Exodus chapter 1 and talk a little bit about them as I do. The first 4 words, can you see them there? They say, these are the names.
Mm-hmm.
These are the names. Well, we call the book Exodus, but in Hebrew, the title is, these are the names. Yeleh Semot. And Tyler, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing Hebrew correctly. It's been a long time, my friend. But you can always chime in if I get it wrong, correct me. I don't mind at all. Actually, the translation with those 4 words, these are the names, needs one other word to really make it completely reflect what the Hebrew says. Because what the Hebrew says is, and, A-N-D, and these are the names. And these are the names. The first words of Exodus, chapter 1 and verse 1, are purposely identical to the first words of Genesis chapter 46 and verse 8. Let me show those words to you. This is so cool, this works. There's Genesis chapter 46 and verse 8. Do you see them?
Mm-mm.
Now
No.
these are the names. In verse 8, they did translate and they translated it in the RSV as now. There it is right there. Same words back in Exodus. So, and these are the names. Now, the question is, why begin a book with a conjunction? And why begin it with the conjunction A-N-D, and? There's a real good reason for that. Because you cannot really read the book of Exodus without understanding the linkage between the book of Exodus and the book of Genesis. And the linkage is made 2 ways. It works both ways. Genesis anticipates Exodus, and we'll see that tonight. And Exodus begins by looking back to Genesis, and we've just seen that. Genesis 46:8, we learn, now these are the names of the tribes of Israel. And in Exodus chapter 1, these are the names of the sons of Israel. It's neat to see the linkage through that little word "and," but they're
Yeah.
closely linked, and the
Yeah.
linkage works both ways. Yeah,
We're still looking at Moses.
you are.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that's not good.
I
Hang on.
know.
Ah, thank you, Carol. Really, that's helpful. Somebody should have yelled at me before this.
I did. You didn't listen.
I didn't. Well,
No.
I've been known to do that. How about now? Can you see it now?
Chapter 1.
Yes.
All right,
yes.
let me show you again. That's Exodus 1:1. Here comes Genesis. See? Now these are the names. In Genesis 46, these are the names of the descendants of Israel. And there come all the tribes and all their descendants. And back in Exodus, these are the names of the sons of Israel. And it leaves out in the RSV the word now or and. But here they are. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his own household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, from Levi's tribe comes Moses, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. All the offspring of Jacob were 70 persons. And you know what that means. It's a number of fullness or completeness. Jacob's complete family was made up of 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. And then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. And then you get something really interesting in verse 7 of chapter 1. It says, "But the descendants of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong. So the land was filled with them." They were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly. So the land was filled. Does that remind you? Does it ring any bells for you? That kind of language? Well, I hope it does, because it's another backward look at the book of Genesis. Here's Genesis 1:28. "And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Exodus in 1:7 is consciously reflecting that language. God's commission to Adam and Eve was to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth. And Exodus says that's exactly what happened as the people of Israel sojourned in the land of Egypt after Jacob and his tribe came to Egypt. They were fruitful. They increased greatly. They multiplied. They grew exceedingly strong, and the land was filled with them. And then comes verse 8. "Now there arose a new king over Egypt, a new Pharaoh, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. If war befalls us, they might join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Now let's pause there for a minute again. The descendants were fruitful, they multiplied, they filled the earth. That was God's mandate for the descendants of Adam and Eve. But in Egypt at this time, that blessing that God gave them in Genesis 1:28, when God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, the blessing has become a curse. It's called out in Exodus chapter 1 and verses 9 and 10 in the words of Pharaoh. Behold, the people of Israel are too many, too mighty. Let's deal shrewdly with them, lest they continue to multiply. And then if war befalls us, they might join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So again, you can see how Exodus and Genesis are tied together, absolutely tied together, so that you really cannot interpret the one well without the other, especially in Exodus. Exodus looks back to Genesis. So if the blessing that God gives in Genesis 1:28 has now become a curse on the lips of Pharaoh, will God allow his good design for humanity, and particularly for the children of Abraham and the children of Jacob, all those 70 people who went down to Egypt, will he allow his good design for them? They are Abram's descendants. Will God allow his good design for them to become a curse? The answer, my friends, is no. No. God is going to step in to be faithful to his promise, the promise that he made to Abraham, that Abraham's descendants would be God's own people. God had said to Abram, I will make of you a great nation. That's Genesis 12. God is going to redeem his people from slavery in Egypt, and God is going to use as his human agent of redemption a man named Moses, a member, as we have seen, of the tribe of Levi. And Levi is going to become the tribe that becomes the priesthood, isn't it? Yes, it is. God will step in according to the promise that God makes to Abraham in Genesis 15. Just after God instituted the Abrahamic covenant, God made a promise to Abraham. I want you to see it. Let me pull it up on the screen here for you. Then the Lord said to Abram, know of a surety
Mhm.
that your descendants will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be slaves there, and they will be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation which they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. This is Genesis 15. Remember how I said the books are linked together? Genesis looks forward to Exodus in some ways. This is a very specific way. God tells Abram what's going to happen to his family before it happens. Genesis looks forward to Exodus. Exodus looks back on Genesis. As for yourself, Abram, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete, but we'll leave that aside. You can see the prophecy very clearly, can't you? Sure you can. Let's go back again to Exodus. And pick up the story in verse 8 again. This word right here, that's translated shrewdly, is a very interesting word. In Hebrew, it's hakam. It means to deal shrewdly, to deal actually wisely, because hakam is a verbal form that's derived from a noun, chokmah, and chokmah is the word for wisdom. What Pharaoh is saying is, come, let us deal wisely, very shrewdly with this people. The only other occurrence of this verb that's translated here in the RSV, deal shrewdly, deal wisely. The only other occurrence of this verb is back in Genesis again. Let me take you back there. I'm having so much fun playing with this program. Thank you for being guinea pigs for me. Look, Genesis 41:33. This is the story of Joseph. Joseph has just interpreted Pharaoh's dreams about the fat cows and the skinny cows. And Pharaoh says, great job, Joseph. What should I do? And part of what Joseph says back to Pharaoh about what he should do is this in verse 33. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a man discreet and hokmah, wise, and set that man over the land of Egypt. And then you know the rest, how that man is going to become the manager of a process that's going to store up grain for 7 years to supply grain during 7 years of famine. But I want you to look at that word wise with me. You know who Pharaoh appoints, right? Pharaoh appoints Joseph. There is no one wiser than you, Pharaoh says. I will make you that man that you spoke about. Back again to Exodus. Come, let us deal shrewdly, let us deal wisely. But this time, the words are on the lips of another Pharaoh who does not know Joseph. And the irony is really profound, isn't it? Here's a Pharaoh 4 generations separated from the one Hebrew named Joseph, who saved the people of Israel and his own people from famine. He has forgotten about that man. He says, here's what's going to be wisdom for me. I'm going to deal shrewdly with them. I'm afraid, I have a worry, I have anxiety. My anxiety is that they're going to multiply. They're going to keep being fruitful and multiplying. And then if war befalls us and enemies come against us, they might join those enemies, fight against us, and escape from the land. So instead of doing something wise to save the people of Israel, this Pharaoh wants to deal shrewdly, to do something he considers wise in his own wisdom in order to save his kingdom and his kingship. The irony of that is profound. When Pharaoh says, you know, they might join our enemies and fight against us and escape, the word joined in Hebrew is yasaf. And the Hebrew name for Joseph is actually Yosef. Pharaoh says, lest they be joined to our enemies, Yasaf. And again, it's almost like saying Joseph's name, the one that he doesn't know, or he would not deal with Joseph's descendants the way that he's going to deal with them. Let's keep going. But the more they oppressed, but the more they oppressed the Israelites, the more the Israelites multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they made the people of Israel serve with rigor. They made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they made them serve with rigor. Then the king of Egypt, who is the only person alongside Joseph who we've met in the story so far. Joseph is the only named person so far in chapter 1, but now in verse 15, we're going to meet 2 more people whose names will appear in the opening of the book of Exodus. And those are 2 women. Their names are Shiphrah and Puah. They are midwives. They are women who assist Hebrew women in the birthing process. It's interesting, isn't it? That after the name of Joseph and after the king of Egypt, who is presented but is not named, you have 2 women's names. 2 men, one named, one unnamed, 2 women, both named. It's a really interesting thing. These 2 women are midwives, and they are going to actually give birth to the rest of the narrative in Exodus because of what they do. Watch it happen. Pharaoh is going to attempt to assert his power to destroy Israel. He's going to assert his power to bring death to Israel. But God is going to assert his power, God's power, to protect Israel. And God is going to use as his first agents of protection two women named Shiphrah and Puah. It is through these two women that Pharaoh's power of death will be overcome by God's power to bring life. Pharaoh summons them in, and then in verse 16 he says to them, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women, and you set them upon the birth stool. This is a device where they could stand, and it was a stool, and so the force of gravity could help in the process of giving birth. When you set them upon the birth stool, if it's a son, you shall kill him. Pharaoh's edict of death. But if it's a daughter, she shall live. Now, that's Pharaoh's plan. Pharaoh's wisdom. Watch God's wisdom be at work through these two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Verse 17 says, but the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. And so the king of Egypt calls the midwives and says to them, why have you done this? I hear you're letting the male children live. And at this point, the whole story could have gone another direction. But watch the wisdom, the chokmah of these midwives. The midwives said to Pharaoh, it's because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous when they give birth, and they're delivered before the midwife comes to them. What wise words. Probably not entirely true, but very wise response. As a result, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people continued to multiply, and they grew very strong. These two midwives come back, they report the Hebrew women are full of vigor. That word vigor is the Hebrew word hayot. Hayot. And so Pharaoh punts. His plan A has been foiled. The midwives say, we can't do anything like you ask us to do, because before we are able to do anything, they've already given birth. And then Pharaoh punts and goes to plan B. He quits working with the midwives, and he commands all of his people. And he says to them, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you, all of you, when you see them or hear about them, you shall pick them up and throw them into the Nile. But you shall let every daughter live. Now, this brings us to the first part of Exodus chapter 2. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and took to wife a daughter of Levi. We met two women in the end of chapter 1. We're going to meet two more women in the beginning of chapter 2. One is going to be the mother of Moses. The other is going to be the sister of Moses. And then we're going to meet a third woman, and we'll let her come into the story in just a moment. This woman that this unnamed man from the house of Levi takes as his wife is a daughter of Levi. She's from the tribe of Levi as well. She conceives, and she bore a son. And when she saw that he was, and the RSV says, a goodly child. Some translations say a beautiful child, other translations say a fine child. And no matter how you translate this word, in Hebrew, it's the word tov. he was a goodly child, kitov. That may remind you, if you know Hebrew, and since you don't, I'll remind you that this is Genesis wording again. When God looks around at his creation in Genesis chapter 1, he calls it tov. It's good, it's beautiful, it's fine, it's just like I designed it to be. When this woman looks at her baby, she sees a child that is just as God intended him to be. And so, to hide him from her neighbors, she hides him for 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket. In Hebrew, this is the word tebah. Tebah. And the basket is made of bulrushes, but I want you to think about the word basket with me for just a moment, because tebah occurs in the book of Genesis, and I want to take you back there so you can see it with me. I wonder if you know this story. I'll bet you're looking at it and you can pick it up.
It's the building of the ark.
Yep. In Genesis chapter 6 and verse 14, God says, make yourself a tebah of gopher wood, not of reeds, but of gopher wood, and make rooms in the tebah and cover it inside and out with pitch. So back in Exodus 2, when this mother could hide her goodly child, her beautiful child, her child that reminded her that God had been at work in her womb, knitting the parts of this child together, this boy. She was beautiful. She hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him and made a little ark, a basket, not made out of gopher wood, but made out of bulrushes. And she daubed it together with bitumen and pitch. So, again, the author is telling us as we move into chapter 2, you can't understand Exodus unless you understand its connection with Genesis. You have to keep reading Genesis forwards. You have to keep reading Exodus backwards. But when we read Exodus looking forwards, not looking backwards to Genesis now, but looking forward into the narrative of Exodus, there's another interesting connection with this basket. For when this basket, this little ark that God is going to use to preserve Moses, when that's put into the water, it's put, you see, she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds at the river's brink, among the reeds. The Hebrew word for reed is suf. And as you look forward in the narrative, it's going to be used again in a very central part of the book of Exodus, in chapter 15 and verse 4. The water that the nation of Israel will cross when they cross the Red Sea on dry land, that's the water of the Sea of Reeds. The Sea of Reeds. Moses is placed in part of that sea in a little ark when he is born. He is going to lead, not in an ark, but in a great procession, not animals, but the whole nation of Israel through the Sea of Reeds. And both of them are going to involve a miracle of God. Because while we think of the crossing of the Red Sea as a great miracle, the preservation of this one little baby boy's life is a miracle as well. Let's watch it unfold. Moses' life here foreshadows what is going to happen to the whole nation of Israel. He's going to be delivered, and his deliverance anticipates the deliverance of the nation of Israel, which is going to happen later on in chapter 15. But this is the way that Moses' deliverance happens. And I want to finish up by playing a video for you. So I need to get rid of this screen. Stop sharing. There we go. There are all of your beautiful faces again. And now I'm going to share a different screen with you. I'm going to play a video for you. The video comes from a woman who is a professor of Old Testament. And her name is Carmen Joy Imes, I-M-E-S. She and her husband, Danny, have a family. They have 3 children. And they met and married when they were both in college up here in the Northwest at Multnomah. After that, she went on to do a master's degree at Gordon Conwell on the East Coast, and then a doctoral degree, a PhD in biblical theology with a major in Old Testament at Wheaton College. And you've heard Mike Pickard talk about John Walton, who was one of the professors of Old Testament at Wheaton. There's another professor also who's very well known. His name is Daniel Block. And she did her PhD with Daniel Block. And she studied one of the 10 commandments that perhaps I'll get a chance to talk to you about. It's not the one that Joe's talking about or that you heard Mike talk about last week, but we'll see if we get there. Anyway, she's written a new book called Bearing God's Name, and I will talk with you about that later on as well. But I wanted to, first of all, give her credit. You're probably sitting there going, well, you told us that you weren't very good in Old Testament, Jim, but you've been throwing all these Hebrew words around and all this stuff. Guess where I got it from? I did my reading and prep today in Carmen Joy Imes stuff. She's writing a commentary right now on the book of Exodus. She's put some of her stuff up early for folks to follow along and learn from. And I found it fascinating because, honest to goodness, folks, I had not seen the connection between Genesis and Exodus so well. Never before. And when I saw those today, I knew what I wanted to share with you tonight. So please give all the credit to her. And I want to let her talk you through the last part of our time together tonight. So here is Dr. Imes. Let's see if I can do this right. Take you off there. Bring her up here. Where are you? Yes, there you are. Here's the statue of Moses. Oh yeah, I had these slides for you. There she is. That's her and her family, her and her husband, Danny, and their 3 children. And this is the book that she wrote. That was her PhD thesis, and it's called Bearing Yahweh's Name at Sinai. And it's been published. And it's been popularized and for a less scholarly audience, perhaps. And it's called Bearing God's Name. It's been published recently by InterVarsity Press. Here's the slide. She has something that she calls Torah Tuesdays. And I discovered Torah Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, she puts up a link that has something to do with what she's discovered in her study of the book of Exodus as she's writing the commentary on Exodus that she's writing in a series that Baker is publishing, Baker Books is publishing. And I'm going to play a clip for you now from a Torah Tuesday here. And I have to, before I do that, I have to get my screen sharing set right. Hang on with me just a second. What I need to do is stop. And then I need to go over here. And I need to do this and share the sound so you can hear it. But if you can't hear it, holler, okay? All right. Now I can go back here. Now I can click on this link. Click on this link. There we go.
Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Today we're going to track one of the most interesting and commonly used words in the Exodus story, and that is the word go. Most people who've heard the
Somebody's sharing here. Let's see. Is it playing all right, Carolyn? Is it playing all right?
No,
No, we lost the volume.
Just audio.
Just the audio. All right, let's try this. Take you back to the beginning. Try again. How are we doing now? We got it?
Zero.
No,
No.
All right, hang on. If at first you don't succeed. Let's see, let's get rid of that. I'm gonna try this a different way. Let's see. Want to hear sounds coming from your computer as well as see your shared screen. That's what I'm supposed to click. All right, we're gonna try this one more time. One more different way here. Let's see. Get back to this. Grab this.
Okay.
Go over here. Let's try again. Are we doing okay now?
No, nothing.
The picture is all we have.
Huh. All right, well, I will send you the link then so you can see her and hear her. That's disappointing. That should have worked. It says it's working on mine. Let's see.
Jim, you could try playing it just from YouTube, not through PowerPoint.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna try. That's what I did.
Oh,
I did. So my screen share says if I share sound,
right now you're sharing your PowerPoint. Can you share your web browser?
yep, do that.
That might work.
Let's try that. Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah.
That was it.
There you
Okay.
go.
Got it.
Ah, it's over.
All right. Thank you, Tyler.
Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Today we're going to track one of the most interesting and commonly used words in the Exodus story, and that is the word go. Most people who've heard the Exodus story know that God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." But long before that happens, there are other places where the word go appears in the narrative and anticipates where the story is going to end up in really clever ways. So in Exodus chapter 2, right after Moses' mother puts his papyrus ark in the reeds of the river, like we talked about last week, Moses' sister stations herself nearby so that she can watch over her little brother and see what happens to him. And the next thing that happens is the daughter of Pharaoh comes down to the river, and we are nervous. Here is a member of the royal household. What will she do when she finds this child? This could be ugly. So Pharaoh's daughter goes down to the Nile to bathe. She sees the basket, and there's a sort of dramatic slowing of the story here, where we see step by step what she does, and we're wondering how she's going to respond. She saw the basket among the reeds. She sent her female slave to get it. She opened it. She saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. We've already had midwives who defied Pharaoh. Moses' mother defied Pharaoh. Now Pharaoh's own daughter is going to defy him. And Miriam approaches, we aren't told her name yet at this point, but the sister of the baby approaches Pharaoh's daughter and says, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" This word in Hebrew, we see it in English too, go. She's asking for permission to go. May I go? In the same verb form that Moses will later ask Pharaoh, may we go and worship God in the wilderness? And whereas Pharaoh will say no, the daughter of Pharaoh says yes. So she says, may I go? Verse 7. And Pharaoh's daughter says, yes, go. And she's giving a command, go, which is the command we want to hear from Pharaoh, but it takes a long time to get there. So she uses a strong imperative, in fact, like a double, going you shall go, like an emphatic go. And then it says the girl went to get the baby's mother. And this is my favorite part. Pharaoh's daughter said to her in English, take this baby and nurse him for me. But it's the word go again. And it's an imperative in Hebrew. It's what's called a hifil imperative, which is like a causative where you cause someone else to do something. So Pharaoh's daughter tells Moses' mother, make him go. In other words, take him. It's this mic drop moment because this is exactly what we're wanting Pharaoh to say, like, go, get out of here. And he doesn't say it until chapter 12. But here we have, again, an anticipation from Pharaoh's own household of the permission that the Israelites need to leave Egypt. So you can continue reading through the story and find the other places where the word go is used. I'll just point out a couple more examples. In chapter 5, the people have come to Pharaoh. The leaders of the Israelites have come and asked for permission to go, and he's not liking it. So in chapter 5, verse 7, you are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. So it's the phrase we want to hear from him, but not in the right context. Let them go and get more straw, get their own straw. And then he repeats what they've said in verse 8. They're lazy. That's why they're crying out, let us go and sacrifice to God. So again, lots of toying with this phrase, may I go? Let us go. You may go. All through the story. Finally, in chapter 10, verse 28, Pharaoh is exasperated with Moses and tells him to go, but he's not saying to leave Egypt. He just wants him to leave the palace. But that probably anticipates what we see in chapter 12, verse 31. This is right after the death of Pharaoh's firstborn. And it says, during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, up, leave my people, you and the Israelites, go worship Yahweh as you have requested. After months of equivocating and trying to let them just do part of what they've asked for, he's finally like, fine, go. All of you may go. Bring your flocks and herds. Go worship Yahweh if that's what you need to do. So we finally get the go we've been waiting for. And in the midst of this story in chapter 2 that we were looking at closely is probably one of the most ironic reversals of human history. The mother who has had to hide her child for fear of his murder by Pharaoh's men is now paid by Pharaoh's women and protected by the state to nurse him through his infancy. And she's told by the very daughter of Pharaoh, make him go. So again, beautiful literary design to this story. I hope you've been inspired by these connections, and go hunting. There's lots more goes in this story.
She said that far better than I could. She is a remarkable woman and a remarkable student of the Bible. And I'm glad someone pointed her out to me. Chris Wright, who's professor of Old Testament at Fuller, wrote a glowing publishers call them blurbs or publicity blurbs talking about her and what she's done in terms of not only the Old Testament narrative, linking them together and showing us the big story of the Old Testament, but also showing us how it connects to the New Testament. And we'll have maybe a chance to talk more about that next week. But that's what I got for you tonight. But it's a lot of pieces, but I hope it's made kind of a cumulative effect on you. And I hope what you take away from this night is it's impossible to read Exodus without looking back at Genesis. It's amazing to see how much Genesis looks forward to Exodus. And then it's also very important to see the way in which Moses' early years anticipate in his own life the kind of deliverance that is going to become the central theme of the book of Exodus when it becomes deliverance, not just for Moses as an individual, but for the whole nation of Abraham's descendants. Exodus is this marvelous gospel story in the Old Testament. It is the story about how God acts to redeem his people from slavery. And of course, that has really profound overtones in the New Testament, because that's exactly what God is doing for us through his agent, Jesus. And there are loads of parallels, folks, between Moses in Exodus and Jesus in the Gospels. And I hope to be able to talk about some of them with you next week. But that's it for tonight. I'm interested in hearing feedback, and you all can talk to each other. You can talk to me, but I'd love to hear from some of you out there. What did you think of all of that?
Thank you, Jim. It was interesting.
Good. Interesting is a good starting point.
Does she does that each week?
She does it each Tuesday. It's called Torah Tuesdays.
Okay.
Take the word Torah.
Is it on YouTube?
It's on YouTube.
So do they have any idea who wrote Genesis and Exodus?
The answer really, Tom, is no. It's anonymous to us. An Orthodox Jew or a conservative Christian would immediately say Moses. And there's no reason not to believe that many of the traditions and possibly some of the narrative itself could have come from Moses. But scholarship shows that there are at least several hands that are probably involved in the final, what we know as the final book of Exodus.
Would they have still been in the totally oral tradition, passing it down orally at that point in time, Jim?
No, not necessarily. We know there was writing in Egypt.
Okay.
Moses was raised in Egypt. He would have learned how to write.
Oh, okay, okay.
They had the JEPD many years. That was the whole, and I always held out for the M source.
Mm,
I would have thought you'd like the B source, Joe. Veteran source.
The simplest argument against Moses having written all of it is he surely couldn't have written the bits about his death. And hopefully he didn't write the verse about Moses being the most humble man in all the land.
Good point. Yeah. Good point.
mm,
Isn't it interesting to see how the books are interrelated? And this is the only book that begins in the Old Testament with the word A-N-D. It's just incredible to see how God works through generation after generation to bring about the big picture, the big plan. And the promises made to Abraham, Abraham's descendant, and a prophecies made to Abraham, your descendants will go down to Egypt. It happens. And then they multiply. And that's God's good plan, except God's blessing in Genesis 1 is inverted, and it becomes a curse out of Pharaoh's lips. These cursed Israelites, they're multiplying everywhere. Can't get rid of them. They're swarming like the creatures that crawl upon the earth, and so let me figure out a way to bring death to them. And God says, no, I'm going to bring life to them. And I'm going to do it through the story of one man initially. And then his story will become the story of a whole nation. And I just think it's neat to grab the big picture.
So
I
then
understand.
next week, Joe's gonna talk.
No, I'm gonna do next week and then Joe's gonna come back.
Okay, so you're
My
just gonna
birthday's actually
continue
March
on.
the 20, my birthday's actually last Monday, which is March the 29th. I'm taking that week off.
Yeah, I'll be doing, so coming events on the 29th. I'll be coming to you from Tucson, Arizona in the desert. This is a good time to talk about Moses in the desert, and be visiting friends of St. Andrews, where I was senior pastor for 17 years. And on the 29th, I'm going to do the pillar of fire that guides them through the wilderness. They get across the sea. They don't have a GPS, but they got something better. They got a pillar of fire and a cloud. We're going to talk about that. And then on the 12th visit, Jim, I'm going to talk about the burning bush at Sinai.
In April, yeah.
In April, yeah. And Becky and I spent a couple of days in Sinai in 2015. We were at St. Catherine's, the old monastery, and we went up with a Bedouin guide on camels, 2/3 up the side of Mount Sinai, and then we hiked the rest of it. And at dawn, we were up there and we found the cleft of the rock with this Bedouin guide. And then in the old St. Catherine's monastery, they have this, we'll call it creosote bush. And this is the original burning bush type of bush. And then so we've got pictures of us up exploring the mountain itself, right at the top. And the monastery there that goes way back to the Syrian monks. And so we'll talk about the burning bush, which is a retrospective, which got him there. And then I'm going to talk about when he's up on the mountain and his brother's building this golden calf down below.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about when the presence of the Lord passed over him, and he's in that cleft of the rock. And I'll show you where we were there. And who knows, it could have been the same place, but it's a wild piece of country. You got to go several hundred miles, about a couple hundred miles in from the maybe 150 from on the other side of Sinai, through all these UN guard posts, and we got amazing pictures of the place. So I think that'll be fun. Maybe Becky here too.
Yeah.
But camel ride up the mountain in the middle of the night.
Ooh.
So then hiking in the middle of the night, so you're there at dawn. And so those are the three texts: pillar of fire, burning bush, which is a retrospective, and then when Moses climbs up there and God passes over and pronounces to him his name. In the meantime, he finds out that things are not going well back down in camp. So we'll look at those three texts.
So Joe is going to do those texts, and we're going to stay in the book of Exodus for a couple of months. And
Well,
so
looking
we
forward
won't
to
change.
next time.
Cool.
Jim, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, remember that little arc. And y'all stay safe. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here
Yeah.
tonight.
Good night.
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 Good night.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Night.
All right.
Night.